The moment I saw the envelope wedged in my mailbox with that familiar HOA logo stamped in the corner, I knew my peaceful Friday evening was about to go straight down the toilet. I had just gotten home from my shift at the logistics company in downtown Portland, Oregon, where I worked as a warehouse manager. My feet ached, my back was sore, and all I wanted was to kick off my boots, crank up the heat in my townhouse, and watch some television until I fell asleep on the couch. Instead, I was standing in my small entryway, staring at a letter that made my blood pressure spike higher than it had been all week. The letter was typed on official HOA letterhead, signed by none other than Patricia Whitmore, the president of the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association. Patricia was exactly the kind of person you would picture when you heard the words HOA president. She was a woman in her late 40s with an aggressive blonde bob haircut that somehow managed to look sharp enough to cut glass, and she wore pantsuits like they were armor for suburban warfare. I read the letter once, then twice, convinced I had to be misunderstanding something. But no, the words remained the same on my third read-through. "Dear Mr. Yates Olsen," it began, "it has come to our attention that your heating usage during the winter months has been substantially higher than other residents in the Riverside Meadows community. As outlined in Section 7.4 of the HOA Guidelines, residents are expected to maintain reasonable utility usage that aligns with community standards. Your current heating patterns suggest excessive use that does not reflect responsible community citizenship. We are hereby requesting that you reduce your heating usage by at least 40% over the next billing cycle. Failure to comply may result in fines as outlined in your HOA agreement. We appreciate your cooperation in maintaining our community standards." I stood there in my entryway, still holding my work bag, and let out a laugh that had absolutely no humor in it. They were demanding I use less heat in my own home that I owned. Well, that I was paying a mortgage on anyway. The thing was, I had been running my heat more than usual, but it was not because I liked turning my townhouse into a sauna for fun. It was February in Portland, and while we did not get the brutal cold that some parts of the country experienced, it was still plenty cold enough to need heat. But more importantly, my unit had been unusually cold all winter. I had noticed it starting in November, right after the first real cold snap. No matter how high I set the thermostat, certain rooms in my townhouse just would not warm up properly. My bedroom, which was on the second floor, stayed perpetually chilly. The living room was not much better. I had started sleeping in sweatpants and 2 layers of shirts, and I could see my breath in my bedroom some mornings before the heat finally kicked in enough to take the edge off. I had been blasting the heat just to maintain a barely comfortable temperature, not because I was trying to recreate the Bahamas in the Pacific Northwest. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the letter. Then I texted my neighbor, Marcus, who lived 3 units down. Marcus was a software developer who worked from home, and he had been one of the first people to welcome me to the neighborhood when I moved in about 2 years ago. He was also the only other person I knew who had received similarly ridiculous letters from Patricia and her HOA board before. "Dude, you are not going to believe this," I typed, attaching the photo. "Patricia is now monitoring my heating usage," Marcus responded within minutes. "Are you serious? That is insane even for her. What are you going to do?" I did not have an answer yet. I walked into my living room, dropped my bag on the couch, and looked around the space. I had worked hard to make this place feel like home. The townhouse was not huge by any means, about 1,500 square feet across 2 floors, but it was mine. I had saved for years to afford the down payment, and I had been proud of myself for finally achieving homeownership at 32 years old. Now, I was being told how much heat I could use by someone who did not even live in my unit and had no idea what conditions I was dealing with. I walked over to the thermostat and checked it. 68 degrees. That was what I kept it set at, which was not exactly tropical. I put my hand against the wall near the thermostat and felt the chill coming through. Something was definitely wrong with this place. The next morning, I woke up to my bedroom being cold enough that I could see my breath again, despite the heat running all night. I grabbed my phone and started doing research. I looked up average heating costs for townhouses in Portland, and while mine were slightly higher than average, they were not outrageously so. Certainly not high enough to warrant the HOA getting involved. I decided my first move should be to respond to Patricia's letter directly. I sat down at my small kitchen table with my laptop and composed an email. Dear Patricia, I received your letter regarding my heating usage. I want to clarify that I am not using excessive heat for comfort or luxury. My unit has been unusually cold all winter, and I have been running my heat at what I consider to be a reasonable temperature of 68 degrees. I believe there may be an insulation issue or some other structural problem with my unit that is causing heat loss. I would appreciate it if the HOA could arrange for an inspection to determine if there are any issues that need to be addressed. Best regards, Yates Olsen. I sent the email and felt moderately satisfied with myself. I had been professional, reasonable, and had offered a logical explanation for the situation. Surely, Patricia would understand and we could work together to figure out what was going on. I should have known better. Patricia's response came that same afternoon, and it was about as understanding as a brick wall. Mr. Olsen, the HOA does not provide inspections for individual unit concerns related to temperature preferences. All units in Riverside Meadows are built to the same specifications and meet all required building codes. If you are experiencing discomfort, I suggest you adjust your personal clothing choices or invest in supplemental heating options that do not impact your primary heating usage. The HOA's position on your excessive heating usage remains unchanged. You are expected to reduce your usage by 40% beginning with your next billing cycle. I read the email 3 times, each time feeling my anger build a little more. Temperature preferences. Clothing choices. Like I was some kind of diva who wanted to walk around in shorts and a tank top in the middle of winter. I called Marcus that evening and invited him over for a beer. When he arrived, I showed him both Patricia's letter and her email response. "This is ridiculous," Marcus said, shaking his head. He was a tall guy with dark hair that was always slightly messy, and he wore his usual work-from-home uniform of jeans and a hoodie. "She cannot actually enforce this, can she?" "I have no idea," I admitted. "I need to look at my HOA agreement again, but I do not remember anything about them being able to dictate my utility usage. Even if they could, your heat being set at 68 degrees is not excessive. My thermostat is at 70 and nobody has said anything to me." That caught my attention. "Really? So why am I being targeted?" "Because Patricia has it out for anyone who does not kiss her feet," Marcus said bluntly. "You remember when I painted my front door last spring? She sent me 3 letters threatening fines because the color I chose was half a shade off from the approved color palette. Half a shade. I had to get my paint compared to official samples and everything." "I remember that disaster," I said. "How did you finally get her to back off?" "I hired a lawyer to write a letter explaining that the color was within the acceptable range according to the HOA documents. Cost me $500, but it shut her up," I groaned. The idea of having to hire a lawyer over my heating usage felt absurd, but I was starting to realize that Patricia was not going to be reasonable about this. Before I go that route, I want to figure out what is actually going on with my unit, I said. Because I am telling you, Marcus, something is genuinely wrong here. This place should not be this cold with the heat running constantly. Marcus stood up and walked around my living room, putting his hands on various walls like I had done. Yeah, man, it is pretty chilly in here. And your heat is running right now, right? Has been all day. Something is definitely off. Have you checked your windows? Maybe there is a draft. We spent the next 20 minutes going around my townhouse checking every window and door for drafts. We found a few spots where the weather stripping could be better, but nothing that would explain the overall temperature issue. When we went upstairs to my bedroom, Marcus stopped in the doorway and frowned. Dude, is that moisture on your wall? I looked where he was pointing. In the corner of my bedroom, near the exterior wall, there was a small patch of what looked like water staining. I walked over and touched it. The wall was slightly damp. That was not there before, I said, though even as I said it, I realized I was not entirely sure. I did not spend a lot of time staring at the corners of my bedroom walls. At least, I do not think it was. You might have a leak, Marcus said. Or worse, a moisture problem that could explain why your place is so cold. If moisture is getting into your walls, it is going to make insulation basically useless. My stomach dropped. A moisture problem could mean mold, and mold could mean serious health issues, not to mention expensive repairs. I need to get this inspected, I said. Like professionally inspected. Definitely, Marcus agreed. And if there is a problem, the HOA is going to have to deal with it. This is a structural issue, which means it falls under the HOA's responsibility for the building exterior and shared elements. I felt a small glimmer of hope. If I could prove there was a legitimate problem with my unit, then Patricia would have to back off about the heating usage, and the HOA would have to fix whatever was wrong. I spent that Sunday researching inspection companies in the Portland area. I needed someone who could check for both structural issues and mold, since I was now worried about both. I finally settled on a company called Pacific Northwest Property Inspections that had good reviews and specialized in moisture and mold issues. I called them first thing Monday morning and explained my situation. The woman I spoke to, whose name was Jennifer, was sympathetic and professional. "We can definitely help you out," she said. "It sounds like you might have an insulation failure or a moisture intrusion problem. Both are pretty common in townhouses, especially if the building is more than a few years old." "How old is your unit?" "The complex was built about 15 years ago," I told her. "Yeah, that is right in the range where you start seeing these kinds of issues. We can get an inspector out to you this Wednesday if that works for you." Wednesday was only 2 days away. "That would be perfect. What should I expect in terms of cost?" "Our comprehensive inspection, which includes thermal imaging and moisture detection, runs $450. If we find evidence of mold and you want us to do testing to identify the type and extent, that is an additional $200. But let's see what the initial inspection shows first." I agreed to the Wednesday appointment and hung up feeling like I was finally taking action instead of just reacting to Patricia's unreasonable demands. Tuesday evening, I received another email from Patricia. This one informed me that the HOA board had reviewed my case and had determined that I would be fined $200 if my heating usage did not decrease by the required 40% within the next 3 weeks. The email also noted that continued non-compliance could result in additional fines and potentially a lien on my property. A lien on my property over my heating usage. I had to read that part several times to make sure I was understanding it correctly. I forwarded the email to Marcus with the message. Is she actually insane? His response was immediate. Start documenting everything. Every email, every letter, every interaction. If this goes legal, you are going to want a paper trail. He was right. I created a folder on my computer specifically for HOA correspondence and saved everything I had received from Patricia so far. I also wrote up a detailed timeline of events, noting when I first noticed the temperature issues, when I received the first letter, and all subsequent communications. Wednesday could not come fast enough. The inspector, a guy named Robert Chen, arrived right on time at 2 in the afternoon. He was probably in his mid-40s, carrying several cases of equipment, and had the kind of calm, competent demeanor that immediately put me at ease. "Thanks for coming out," I said, letting him in. "I am pretty worried about what you are going to find." "Let us not worry until we have reason to," Robert said with a slight smile. "Why don't you walk me through what you have been experiencing, and then I will do my assessment." I explained everything to him. The persistent cold despite running the heat constantly, the damp spot on my bedroom wall, and yes, the ridiculous HOA letter demanding I reduce my heating usage. Robert listened carefully, occasionally nodding. When I finished, he said, "Okay, I am going to start with thermal imaging. That is going to show me where you are losing heat and if there are any unusual cold spots that might indicate problems with insulation or moisture intrusion." He pulled out what looked like a specialized camera with a screen on the back and started walking slowly through my townhouse, pointing the camera at walls, ceilings, and floors. I followed him around, watching the screen show different colored patches that apparently represented different temperatures. "This is interesting," Robert said when we got to my living room. He pointed the camera at the exterior wall. On the screen, I could see several large blue patches among the warmer orange and yellow colors. "What does that mean?" I asked. "The blue areas are significantly colder than they should be. See this section here." He pointed to a particularly large blue patch. "That suggests you have either failed insulation or moisture in your walls, possibly both." My heart sank. "That is bad, right? It is not great, but it is fixable. Let us check the rest of the house." We moved upstairs, and the thermal imaging in my bedroom was even worse. The entire exterior wall showed up as mostly blue, and the corner where I had noticed the damp spot was almost purple on the screen. "That is definitely moisture," Robert said, his tone becoming more serious. "Quite a bit of it, actually. I am going to use my moisture meter to get specific readings." He pulled out another device, this one with 2 metal prongs, and pressed it against the wall in several spots. Each time he noted down the numbers. "Your moisture levels here are well above what they should be," he told me. "In some spots, you are reading over 20%. Anything over 15% creates conditions for mold growth." "So I probably have mold," I said, feeling sick. "Very likely. I recommend we do the mold testing to confirm it and identify what types you are dealing with. Some molds are just annoying, but others can cause serious health problems." "Do it," I said immediately. "I need to know exactly what I am dealing with." Robert spent the next hour taking samples from multiple locations. He used what he called a tape lift method in some areas and an air quality test in others. He also took extensive photos and notes, documenting everything he found. When he was finally done, we sat down at my kitchen table, and he went through his preliminary findings with me. "Here is what I can tell you right now," Robert said, pulling out his tablet to show me the thermal images he had taken. "You have significant insulation failure in your exterior walls, both downstairs and upstairs. You also have moisture intrusion, which is likely coming from outside. My guess would be that you have an issue with your building envelope. Maybe failed flashing around the roofline, maybe deteriorated caulking around windows, possibly both. Whatever the source, water is getting into your walls, destroying your insulation and creating perfect conditions for mold growth. And that is why my heating costs are so high, I said. Exactly. You are trying to heat your house, but the heat is escaping through your walls because the insulation is compromised. Plus, damp insulation basically does not work at all. You could set your thermostat to 90 degrees and you would still be cold. How bad is this? In terms of health risk, I mean. Robert's expression became more serious. I cannot say for certain until we get the mold lab results back, but based on what I saw, you have visible mold growth in your walls. You have been breathing in mold spores for probably months. Some people are more sensitive than others, but long-term exposure to mold can cause respiratory issues, allergic reactions, headaches, fatigue, and in severe cases, more serious health problems. I thought back over the past few months. I had been tired a lot lately, but I had chalked that up to work stress. I had also had a persistent cough that I had assumed was just winter allergies. Now I was wondering if it had been the mold all along. How soon will you have the lab results? I asked. The mold testing usually takes about 3 to 5 business days. I will rush it given the circumstances. I should have results by early next week. And your report, when will I have that? I will have a complete written report to you by Friday. It will include all my findings, the thermal images, moisture readings, photos, and my professional recommendations for remediation. What do you think it is going to cost to fix this? Robert sighed. That is hard to say without knowing the full extent of the damage. But if we are talking about having to remove and replace insulation, fix whatever is allowing moisture intrusion, and do mold remediation, you are probably looking at somewhere between $15,000 and $30,000, maybe more if the structural damage is extensive. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I did not have that kind of money just sitting around. And this falls under the HOA's responsibility, right, since it is the building structure. That depends on your HOA documents, but typically, yes. Issues with the building envelope, exterior walls, and structural elements are the HOA's responsibility to maintain and repair. You should definitely have a lawyer look at your HOA agreement, but I have done inspections for a lot of townhouse owners in similar situations, and in almost every case, the HOA has been responsible for the repairs. Robert packed up his equipment and gave me a copy of his preliminary notes along with a few of the photos. I will email you the full report on Friday, he said. In the meantime, if you start feeling worse, or if you notice any new symptoms, you might want to stay somewhere else until this gets addressed. After he left, I sat in my cold living room and tried to process everything. I had significant moisture damage, probable mold growth, and a repair bill that could easily hit $30,000 or more. And Patricia wanted to fine me for trying to keep my house warm enough to be habitable. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus. The inspector just left, I told him. You were right, I have major problems. Moisture in the walls, failed insulation, and probably mold. Oh man, that is serious. Did he say how much it would cost to fix? 15 to 30,000, maybe more. Marcus let out a low whistle. The HOA is going to have to pay for that. That is what the inspector said, but I need to confirm it with a lawyer. Do you have a lawyer? Not yet, but I am going to find one. I have a feeling I am going to need one, especially after Patricia's latest email about fines and liens. Send me the inspector's information when you get his report, Marcus said. "I want to have my place checked too. If your unit has these problems, other units probably do as well." That was a good point. If this was a building-wide issue, it would strengthen my case against the HOA. A single unit having problems could potentially be dismissed as a fluke, but multiple units with the same issues would indicate a maintenance failure by the HOA. Thursday morning, I took a sick day from work. I had spent the night coughing and feeling generally awful, and I was not sure if it was the stress of the situation or if I was having a reaction to the mold now that I knew it was there. Probably a bit of both. I spent the morning researching HOA lawyers in the Portland area. I found a firm called Collins and Partners that specialized in HOA disputes and property law. I called and explained my situation to the receptionist, who scheduled me for a consultation with one of their attorneys, a woman named Diane Collins, for Friday afternoon. Friday arrived and I received Robert's full inspection report via email at 10 in the morning. It was 23 pages long and included detailed descriptions of all his findings, multiple thermal images, moisture readings, and photographs of the visible damage. His conclusions were clear and unambiguous. My unit had significant structural and moisture issues that were causing the heating problems and creating hazardous mold growth. His recommendations included immediate professional mold remediation, repair of the building envelope to stop moisture intrusion, and complete replacement of the compromised insulation. I printed out 2 copies of the report, one for myself and one for my lawyer consultation that afternoon. My meeting with Diane Collins was at 3 o'clock. Her office was in downtown Portland, in one of those older buildings that had been renovated to maintain its historic charm while adding modern amenities. Diane herself was probably in her late 50s, with short gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Mr. Olsen," she said, shaking my hand firmly, "I understand you are having some trouble with your HOA." "That is putting it mildly," I said, sitting down in the chair across from her desk. I walked her through everything. The cold townhouse, Patricia's letters demanding I reduce my heating usage, the inspection results, and the threatened fines and lien. Diane listened carefully, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she asked to see the inspection report, my HOA agreement, and all the correspondence from Patricia. She spent about 15 minutes reading through everything in silence. Finally, she looked up and said, "Okay, here is where things stand. First, the good news. According to your HOA's CC and Articles, which are the covenants, conditions, and restrictions that govern the association, the HOA is absolutely responsible for maintaining the structural integrity of the buildings, including exterior walls, roofing, and building envelope. The issues identified in this inspection report clearly fall under the HOA's maintenance obligations. So they have to fix it," I said. "They have a legal obligation to fix it, yes. The bad news is that they can make this difficult. HOAs often try to avoid expensive repairs, especially when there is a board president like this Patricia Whitmore, who seems more interested in power tripping than actual community management. What about her threats to fine me and put a lien on my property?" Diane's expression hardened. "That is where she has overstepped significantly. Your HOA agreement does not give the board authority to regulate individual utility usage in the way she is attempting. The section she cited in her letter, Section 7.4, actually refers to community-wide resources like pool heating or clubhouse usage, not individual unit utilities. She has essentially fabricated authority she does not have. So she cannot fine me. She can try, but it would not hold up in court. In fact, If she does proceed with fines or a lien, you would have grounds for a lawsuit against the HOA for harassment and for failing to meet their maintenance obligations. Especially now that you have documented proof that your high heating usage is directly related to the HOA's failure to maintain the building properly. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. So what should I do? Diane pulled out a fresh legal pad and started writing. Here is what I recommend. First, I am going to draft a letter to the HOA board on my firm's letterhead. This letter will inform them of the inspection findings, demand that they immediately arrange for repairs as required under the CC and Articus, and explicitly state that any fines or liens related to your heating usage will be considered harassment and will result in legal action. Second, I want you to send a certified letter to every board member individually, not just Patricia, with a copy of the inspection report. Make sure the entire board knows what is going on, because I am willing to bet Patricia has not shared your concerns with them. You think she is acting on her own. I think she is someone who likes to exert control, and she may not have bothered to consult with the rest of the board before sending you these threatening letters. If the other board members are reasonable people, they are going to be very unhappy when they find out about this, both because of the liability it creates for the HOA and because it makes them look bad. What if they refuse to fix the problems? Then we escalate. We can file a complaint with the state. We can pursue legal action for breach of their maintenance obligations, and we can potentially loop in other homeowners if their units have similar issues. But let us start with the formal letter and see how they respond. Most of the time, once an HOA realizes they are dealing with a homeowner who has legal representation and documented proof of their case, they back down pretty quickly. How much is this going to cost me? My consultation fee is $250, which covers today's meeting. The letter I am going to draft will be another $500. If we have to pursue litigation, costs can go up significantly, but I would not expect it to come to that. This is a pretty straightforward case of the HOA failing to meet their maintenance obligations. $750 was not cheap, but it was a lot better than the thousands in fines Patricia was threatening, and infinitely better than being stuck with the repair costs myself. Do it, I said. Draft the letter. I want this resolved as quickly as possible. Deanne smiled for the first time since I had arrived. I will have the letter ready for your review by Monday. In the meantime, I want you to document everything. Take photos of the damp spots. Keep a log of your symptoms if you are having any health effects. Save every email, and do not communicate with Patricia or any board members without copying me on it. Understand? Understood. I left Deanne's office feeling better than I had in days. I finally had someone on my side who understood the legal aspects of this situation and who was not intimidated by Patricia's threats. That weekend, I took Deanne's advice and documented everything. I took detailed photos of every damp spot I could find, measured the temperature in different rooms at different times of day, and wrote down every symptom I had been experiencing. The cough I had thought was allergies, the persistent fatigue, the occasional headaches, even some sinus pressure I had been dealing with. I did not know for sure that all of it was mold-related, but I was not taking any chances. I also reached out to a few other residents in my building to ask if they had been experiencing any temperature issues. Out of the 6 people I talked to, 4 said they had noticed their units being colder than usual this winter. 2 of them had also received letters from Patricia about their utility usage, though none as aggressive as what I had gotten. I shared Robert's contact information with all of them and suggested they might want to get their own inspections done. If this was a building-wide problem, and it was starting to look like it was. Then the HOA had been negligent in their maintenance obligations for potentially months or even years. Monday morning, I received an email from Robert with the mold testing results. I read through the report with growing alarm. The air quality tests had identified 3 different types of mold in my unit: Aspergillus, Penicillium, and Stachybotrys. The first 2 were described as common indoor molds that can cause allergic reactions and respiratory issues in sensitive individuals. The third one, Stachybotrys, was noted as commonly known as black mold and was flagged as a significant health concern. According to the report, the concentration levels of Stachybotrys in my bedroom were high enough that Robert recommended I not sleep in that room until professional remediation was completed. The report also strongly suggested that I consider temporarily relocating until the mold could be properly removed and the moisture source eliminated. I forwarded the mold results to Diane immediately, along with a note. Just got the mold test results back. One of the types is black mold at concerning levels. Inspector recommends I relocate temporarily. Diane responded within an hour. This strengthens your case significantly. Black mold is a known health hazard. The HOA's failure to maintain the building has created a dangerous living condition. Do you have somewhere you can stay? I did not, really. I had some friends in Portland, but I did not want to impose on anyone for what could be weeks or even months. I could get a hotel room, but that would get expensive fast. My parents lived in Seattle, which was only about 3 hours away, but I did not want to disrupt my work schedule by staying that far away. I decided to start by talking to Marcus. When I showed him the mold results, his reaction was immediate. "Dude, you need to get out of there." Black mold is no joke. My cousin got really sick from mold exposure a few years ago, and it took her months to fully recover. I know. I am just trying to figure out my options. Stay with me, Marcus said without hesitation. I have a spare bedroom that I barely use. You can crash there until this gets sorted out. Are you sure? I do not know how long it is going to take. I am sure. Seriously, it is not a problem. I work from home anyway, so it is not like I am worried about privacy or anything. Just pack a bag and move your stuff over. I felt a wave of gratitude. Thanks, man. I really appreciate it. No problem. Just promise me you are going to make the HOA pay for this. Patricia needs to be taken down a few notches. That evening, I packed up enough clothes and essentials for a few weeks and moved into Marcus's spare bedroom. It felt strange leaving my own place, but the relief I felt at being out of that mold-filled environment was immediate. I realized I had been feeling increasingly terrible over the past few months, and just one night away from my townhouse made me feel noticeably better. Tuesday morning, Diane sent me the draft of her letter to the HOA board. It was 3 pages of precisely worded legal language that boiled down to: "You have failed in your maintenance obligations. You have created a health hazard. You need to fix this immediately. And if you even think about fining my client, we will bury you in court." I approved the letter, and Diane sent it out that afternoon via certified mail to every member of the HOA board, along with copies of both the property inspection report and the mold testing results. Now came the hardest part: waiting for their response. I did not have to wait long. Wednesday afternoon, I received a phone call from a number I did not recognize. When I answered, a man's voice said, "Mr. Olsen, this is Gregory Barnes. I am a member of the HOA board at Riverside Meadows. I just received the letter from your attorney, and I wanted to reach out to you directly." "Okay," I said cautiously. "I appreciate the call. I need to be frank with you. I had no idea any of this was going on. Patricia never brought your concerns to the board. The first I heard about any of it was when I got your lawyer's letter yesterday with that inspection report attached. I felt a spark of hope. So the board did not approve those letters Patricia sent me. Absolutely not. And I can tell you right now, we never authorized her to threaten fines or liens over your heating usage. When I saw that in the letter, I immediately called an emergency board meeting. We met last night. And what did you decide? We voted unanimously to immediately hire a structural engineer to assess the entire building, not just your unit. If the problems you are experiencing are as severe as this inspection report suggests, and if other units are affected, then we have a major issue that needs to be addressed. We also voted to put any and all fine proceedings on hold indefinitely. That is good to hear, I said, feeling some of the tension leave my shoulders. I also want you to know that we are looking into Patricia's conduct. She clearly overstepped her authority here, and the way she handled your concerns was completely inappropriate. That is going to be dealt with internally. I appreciate that, Mr. Barnes. I really do. But I need to know what the timeline is going to be for actually fixing these problems. I have had to temporarily move out of my unit because the mold levels are dangerous. I understand, and I am sorry you have been put in this position. We are going to move as quickly as we can. The structural engineer is coming out this Friday to do a comprehensive assessment. Once we have his report, we will know the full scope of what we are dealing with, and we can get contractors lined up to start repairs. I am hoping we can have a plan in place within the next 2 weeks. 2 weeks felt like a long time when I was essentially displaced from my home, but it was better than the stonewalling I had been getting from Patricia. Okay, I said. I will wait for the engineer's report, but I am keeping my lawyer in the loop on all of this. That is absolutely your right, and honestly, I think it is smart given what you have been through. I will make sure you get a copy of the engineer's report as soon as we have it. After I hung up, I immediately called Deanne to fill her in on the conversation. That is a very positive development, she said. It sounds like the rest of the board is reasonable and they are trying to make this right. But do not let your guard down completely. I want to see that engineer's report before we agree to anything, and I want to make sure they follow through on actually doing the repairs in a timely manner. What about Patricia? Gregory said they are dealing with her conduct internally. That is good, but internal discipline does not necessarily mean anything will actually happen to her. Keep in mind that she might still try to retaliate or cause problems. Do not communicate with her directly without me being involved. I agreed and spent the rest of the week continuing to stay at Marcus's place and monitoring my health. Away from the mold, my cough was getting better and I had more energy. It was becoming increasingly clear just how much the mold exposure had been affecting me. Friday came and I received an email from Gregory Barnes with the structural engineer's report attached. I downloaded it immediately and started reading. The engineer's findings were even worse than I had feared. He had inspected all 12 units in my building and had found moisture intrusion and insulation failure in 10 of them. The problem, according to his report, was a combination of improperly installed flashing around the roofline when the building was originally constructed, along with deteriorated caulking around windows that had not been maintained properly over the years. Water had been slowly getting into the walls of multiple units for probably several years, destroying insulation and creating ideal conditions for mold growth. The estimated cost for repairs to the entire building was just over $240,000. The work would involve removing and replacing sections of exterior siding, installing proper flashing, replacing all compromised insulation, doing mold remediation in affected units, replacing drywall where necessary, and repainting. The engineer estimated it would take approximately 6 to 8 weeks to complete all the work once it started. I forwarded the report to Diane and called Gregory Barnes. "I just read the engineer's report," I said. "This is a much bigger problem than just my unit." "I know," Gregory said, and he sounded tired. "We are looking at a major special assessment to cover the costs. This is going to impact every homeowner in the complex, not just your building. But it has to be done. We cannot have people living in units with dangerous mold levels." "What is the timeline for starting the work?" "We are meeting with contractors this week to get bids. Assuming we can get someone lined up quickly, I am hoping we can start work within the next 3 weeks. I know that is not ideal for you since you have had to move out, but we are moving as fast as we can." "What about temporary accommodations? I am staying with a friend right now, but some of the other affected residents might need help with that." There was a pause. "That is something we need to discuss with our insurance company. This should potentially be covered under our building insurance, including any temporary relocation costs for residents who cannot safely stay in their units during the repairs. Let me get back to you on that." Over the next week, things moved surprisingly quickly. The HOA held an emergency meeting of all homeowners to explain the situation and the upcoming special assessment. I attended, along with Marcus and several other residents from my building. Patricia was notably absent from the meeting. Gregory explained that she had resigned from her position as HOA president effective immediately. The official reason given was personal reasons, but everyone knew it was because she had badly mishandled my situation and had exposed the HOA to significant liability. The meeting was contentious, as expected. Nobody was happy about the special assessment, which was going to cost each homeowner several $1,000s depending on their unit size. But when Gregory presented the engineer's report and explained the health hazards involved, particularly the presence of black mold in multiple units, most people understood that the repairs could not be delayed. A few homeowners tried to argue that the individual unit owners should be responsible for the repairs, not the HOA. Diane, who I had asked to attend the meeting with me, quickly shut that down by explaining that the CC and Articus clearly made the HOA responsible for building structure and envelope maintenance, and that failure to address these issues could result in lawsuits from affected homeowners. The vote to approve the emergency repairs and the special assessment passed with a strong majority. The HOA also voted to hire a property management company to handle day-to-day operations instead of relying on volunteer board members. This was partially in response to the disaster with Patricia, but also because it was clear that the HOA needed professional management to prevent these kinds of maintenance issues from being neglected in the future. The insurance company came through and agreed to cover temporary relocation costs for residents of the most severely affected units, including mine. I was able to get a furnished apartment not too far from Riverside Meadows for 2 months while the repairs were being done. The HOA's insurance covered most of the cost, which was a relief. The contractors started work 3 weeks after the engineer's report, exactly as Gregory had promised. They set up scaffolding around my building and started the process of removing the damaged siding and fixing the water intrusion issues. It was a massive undertaking, but they worked efficiently and kept to their timeline. I visited my townhouse a few times during the renovation to check on progress. It was strange seeing it essentially gutted, with sections of exterior wall removed and plastic sheeting everywhere. But I could see that they were doing thorough work. The mold remediation company had come through first and removed all the contaminated materials. Then, the insulation company had installed new insulation properly. Finally, the contractors were putting everything back together with the proper flashing and weatherproofing that should have been there from the beginning. 8 weeks after the work started, I got the call from Gregory that my unit was complete and had passed the final inspection. The mold remediation company had done a final air quality test and confirmed that the mold levels were back to normal, safe ranges. I went to see the townhouse that afternoon. Walking in, the first thing I noticed was that it felt warm. Not just warm, but actually, truly warm for the first time since I had moved in. The heat was set to 68 degrees, just like I had always kept it, but now the warmth was actually staying in the house instead of escaping through the walls. Everything looked fresh and clean. They had replaced the drywall in my bedroom where the worst damage had been, and had repainted all the affected areas. It looked better than it had when I first bought the place. That evening, I invited Marcus over to celebrate. We ordered pizza and sat in my actually warm living room. "So now what?" Marcus asked. "Are you going to pursue anything against Patricia?" I had been thinking about that. Deanne had told me I had a potential case for harassment and damages against Patricia personally, especially considering the health effects I had suffered from the mold exposure while she was preventing me from getting the problem properly addressed. "I do not know," I said honestly. "Part of me wants to, just on principle. But she lost her position on the board, which is what she really cared about, and pursuing a personal lawsuit would cost time and money and stress that I am not sure I want to deal with." "That is probably the mature decision," Marcus said. "Though I would not have blamed you if you went after her." "Maybe. But the thing is, the situation is resolved. The building is fixed. Other residents are not going to have to deal with the same problem I did, and the HOA has actual professional management now. That feels like enough of a win to me." A few weeks later, I was settling back into my routine when I got a call from Deanne. "I wanted to follow up with you about one more thing," she said. "The HOA's insurance company has reached out. They are offering you a settlement for your health impacts and the disruption of having to relocate during the repairs." "A settlement? How much are we talking?" "They are offering $15,000. It is meant to cover your medical costs, any ongoing health issues from the mold exposure, the inconvenience of being displaced, and to avoid any potential litigation." $15,000 was more than I had expected. "What do you think I should do?" "That is ultimately your decision, but in my professional opinion, it is a reasonable offer given the circumstances. You could potentially get more if we went to court, but that would involve time, legal fees, and uncertainty. This settlement would resolve everything cleanly." I thought about it for a moment. The money would help cover the out-of-pocket expenses I had incurred, including Deanne's fees, the initial inspection costs, and various other expenses from having to relocate. Plus, it would give me a financial cushion after the stress of the past few months. "I will take the settlement," I said. "I am ready to put this whole thing behind me." Deanne drew up the settlement agreement. I signed it, and 2 weeks later I had a check for $15,000. Life at Riverside Meadows gradually returned to normal, or at least a new normal. The HOA's new property management company was professional and responsive. When residents had maintenance concerns, they were actually addressed promptly, instead of being dismissed or ignored like they had been under Patricia's leadership. I saw Patricia once more, about 3 months after everything had been resolved. I was at a grocery store in the area, and I spotted her in the produce section. For a moment, we made eye contact. I expected some kind of confrontation, but instead, she just looked away and quickly moved to a different part of the store. I realized I did not feel angry anymore. What she had done was wrong, and her refusal to take my concerns seriously had caused me months of health problems and stress. But in a strange way, her incompetence and power tripping had ultimately led to a much bigger problem being discovered and fixed. If she had been reasonable from the start and had actually investigated my concerns, they might have done a patch job on just my unit and missed the building-wide structural issues. The other residents whose units had been affected were grateful too. Several of them had been dealing with mystery health issues that they now realized were probably mold-related. One woman, who lived 2 units down from me, told me her chronic sinus infections had completely cleared up after the repairs were done. Marcus ended up running for a position on the HOA board and won easily. He promised transparency and accountability, and he actually followed through. Under his influence, the board implemented regular building inspections and a preventive maintenance schedule to catch problems before they became major issues. As for me, I finally had the warm, comfortable home I had been paying for all along. My heating bills dropped by almost 40% once the insulation was properly installed and the building was weatherproofed. That detail still made me laugh whenever I thought about it. Patricia had demanded I reduce my heating usage by 40%, and in the end, that is exactly what happened, just not in the way she had intended. I learned a lot from the experience. I learned the importance of documenting everything, of getting professional inspections when something does not seem right, and of not being intimidated by people who misuse what little authority they have. I also learned that sometimes the right approach is to stand your ground, and that there are legal protections in place for exactly these kinds of situations. But mostly, I learned that HOAs can be a blessing or a curse depending on who is running them. Under Patricia's leadership, our HOA had been petty, controlling, and negligent about actual important issues. Under the new professional management and a more reasonable board, it was actually functioning the way it was supposed to, maintaining the property and looking out for the genuine interests of all residents. I still live in my townhouse at Riverside Meadows. When people ask me about my experience with the HOA, I tell them the whole story. It usually gets some shocked reactions, especially the part about the black mold and Patricia trying to fine me for trying to stay warm in my own home. But I always end the story by saying that it worked out in the end. The problem got fixed, not just for me but for everyone in my building. The HOA is run better now. And I have a home that is actually comfortable to live in, with heating bills I can afford and air quality that will not make me sick. Sometimes, I walk by the corner of my bedroom, where the worst of the mold damage had been. The wall is smooth and freshly painted now, with no trace of the moisture staining that had been there before. It is a reminder of how bad things were, but also of how thoroughly they were resolved. Life is good now. My cough is gone, my energy is back to normal, and I can set my thermostat to whatever temperature I want without worrying about angry letters from the HOA. It is amazing how something as simple as a properly insulated, mold-free home can make such a difference in quality of life. And if I ever see Patricia in the grocery store again, I think I will just smile and wave. After all, in her own terrible way, she helped me and a dozen other homeowners get our homes properly fixed. That was never her intention, of course. She was just trying to exert control and make my life difficult. But the inspection she inadvertently pushed me to get ended up exposing a much larger problem that needed to be addressed. Sometimes the worst situations lead to the best outcomes, even if the path there is more complicated and stressful than anyone would choose. These days, when I come home from work and walk into my warm, dry, mold-free townhouse. I feel genuinely grateful. Not grateful to Patricia, obviously, but grateful that I stood up for myself. Grateful for friends like Marcus who had my back. Grateful for professionals like Robert and Deanne who helped me prove my case. And grateful for the other board members who did the right thing once they understood what was really going on. The whole ordeal cost me several months of stress, some money out of pocket, and some temporary health problems. But it also taught me that homeownership means advocating for yourself, that documentation and evidence matter more than emotions or authority, and that most problems, even ones that seem overwhelming at first, have solutions if you are willing to put in the work to find them. My heating bills stay reasonable now, my home stays warm, and the HOA actually functions like it is supposed to. After everything I went through, that feels like a pretty good ending to the story.